Hello, everyone, and
Good
welcome to today's.
afternoon. Welcome to
Fan-
this webcast this afternoon. Um, I think, let me know if you can hear me okay. I'm hearing Carol. She sounds like, I don't know, some sort of weird alien that's being devoured by another bigger alien. I hear it's like low rumble.
yes,
So if you guys can give me a
and I'm
heads
curious.
up,
Can
make
you
sure that
guys
you
hear
can
me?
hear me okay.
Uh, ca- okay, so you can hear me. It looks like they can hear me, Tim. So I'll just do my usual intro. Welcome, everyone. Today's
Okay.
speaker is Tim Medin. I'll pass it to
All right.
him.
Okay, good. So you guys can hear me and I can't hear Carol. Awesome. Cool. So I guess I'm just going to talk over the top of her. So I guess I'll do my own intro because I have no idea where and how this is going to work out. So anyways, welcome to the webcast this afternoon. I was trying to show my this at the same time, but then all my extra crap shows up. We'll see how that works out. Anyway, my name is Tim Medin. I'm going to go through briefly here a little bit about Kerberos and some of the attacks, kind of a more introductory, much broader experience here. By the way, if you want to get the slides, I like to do my presentations backwards. So if you want the slides, check it out in the bottom corner. I don't know which way I'm pointing and how it shows up on your screen, but one of those two places. There's a link at the bottom corner. You can just grab the slides. There's a QR code there. You can grab the slides. And some of you are probably like, I'm not going to open up the QR code. It's like, well, you're going to download it anyway, so whatever. And also that would be awful attribution. Anyway, let's get started here. So real quickly, who the heck am I? My name is Tim Medin. I am a principal consultant at Red Siege. I've also been teaching with SANS for almost 7 years now. Actually, I think I'm over 7. I don't know. It's been a while. I'm a lead author of SANS 560 now. I'm also the instructor for 660, the Advanced Penetration Testing course. INS faculty, the MSISE program director, and then I've been pen testing for a long time. So first up, what is Kerberos? Right? I mean, the sort of mythological answer is it is the three-headed dog that guards the gates to the underworld. Of course, in the IT world, it's going to be the authentication mechanism, right? And we're going to be looking specifically at the Windows authentication mechanism. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of jokes here about, three-headed dog that guards the gates of hell, the authentication mechanism that protects the Windows domain, gates of hell, same sort of thing, right? So let's take a look. Let's jump into to some of this here. So really quickly, in our Windows domain, our Active Directory domain, the main authentication mechanism is going to be Kerberos. What Kerberos does is it allows us to have two parties authenticate to each other where they don't trust each other directly. And we assume that the communication channel between me and that end server is compromised. So what we're going to do is I'm going to prove that I know myself to the KDC, and then we'll sort of use that transitive trust, if you will, to authenticate to the other system. There's a couple of important pieces here. We'll go through some of the basic terms. We'll talk about the KDC. The KDC is the Key Distribution Center. Also, you hear it referred to as Kerberos Distribution Center, Key Distribution Server, all sorts of names. Long story short, this is our domain controller. Okay, I'm going to use those terms sort of interchangeably. They're all essentially the same sort of thing. So we also have our client. So our client is going to be, well, me. I'm going to be authenticating to the network, and I'll talk to that KDC. And of course, we've got the target, either service or server, however you want to call that. I see the terms sort of used interchangeably, but we're going to use these three pieces. These are the three heads of the Kerberos dog that guards the gates of to hell. Okay, so let's take a look here. Let's keep moving forward here. Whoops, take a step back there. So some of the absolute basics. The key here is with Kerberos is we need secrets, right? There's something that me and the Key Distribution Center, the KDC, that we both know. There's some way that we have this trust. Well, in true Kerberos, there's a secret random value. Well, because of the way that Active Directory has developed, the only secret value here is the NTLM hash. So that's going to be the secrets that we're going to be using with Kerberos. So let's walk through the basics. This is sort of my really quick and simple guide here, sort of as if I would explaining it to a child, if you will. On the left, we have me, right? My laptop. I want to authenticate to the server here in this picture. So what I'm going to need to do is I need to get a ticket granting ticket. This is going to allow me to get other tickets. So this establishes the trust between my system and the KDC. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this ticket over, and we'll go through this a little bit more depth. I like to do it high level with pictures a little bit first, but I'm going to say, hey, look, I've encrypted this. Something's encrypted using my hash. I know my hash. The domain controller knows my hash. So what it's going to do is then decrypt that ticket, verify, hey, everything is good to go, and then it's going to send me my TGT. Okay, this is my ticket granting ticket. This allows me to authenticate to other servers. Okay, so this is the piece. I'm not actually going to use my password hash to connect or authenticate to these other servers. I'm going to use this ticket granting ticket. Sort of think of it like your driver's license, right? Like I go in, I present some documentation, get my driver's license, and then I give everyone else my driver's license. Oops, as I bang that. Sorry if the audio going pop. And then I present that driver's license to everyone else. So now I've got my ticket granting ticket. Now I want to talk to some other service. What I need to do is now request a ticket for that specific service. So what I first need to do is say, hey, KDC. Whoops, did I skip a slide? I feel like I skipped a slide here. Totally did. Up front, I get my TGT, talk to the KDC, I get my TGT. This is what I keep. This is what I use to request the ticket for the service. Now you'll notice here, there's two parts. There's two parts to this response, this TGS rep. Ticket granting service response, there's a request first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially tear that in half. I'm going to keep half of that ticket. I'm going to send the other half then to that member server. Now, the ticket that I send to the member server is encrypted. I don't know the contents of that piece. The member server is going to be able to decrypt this. Let's walk through this again, just very quick high level. I'm going to start off, I'm going to authenticate to the KDC, the domain controller, and say, hey, I am Tim. I know my password hash, verify. I'll get my ticket granting ticket. Use my ticket granting ticket to get a ticket that I'm going to use to authenticate to the service. And there's sort of two pieces. One piece I keep and one piece that I'm going to send to the member server. When I send this piece to the member server, again, as we mentioned, this is going to be encrypted using that service account password hash. Now, this is going to be key because we're going to use a number of these different pieces here in the various attacks. So I will send that second half of the ticket that we see here. I'm going to keep my piece, of course, and then send the other half to the server, and that's how I do my authentication, right? I have demonstrated to the KDC, this is who I am. This member server trusts the KDC, so it's going to pass me this ticket. I'll give it to the KDC, and the KDC is essentially going to vouch for me and say, yep, this is Tim. This is the information about Tim. Now, an important thing to note here, we're going to take a step back to that second step. The domain controller does not make decisions whether I have access to this member server. The KDC, the domain controller, is just too busy for that. Otherwise, it would have to know permissions for every single file on the file system, every table, every row in the tables, every column in those tables, and that would just have to be the absolute beast of a server in your network, and that's just not feasible. This just presents essentially that sort of driver's license. You decide that if you're going to allow me in, but it's going to say this is who Tim is. How the server then makes that decision is it looks at what's called the pack. So inside this ticket that I send to the member server, and frankly, it's inside the TGT as well, there is this pack. It's the privileged attribute certificate. what that includes is information about me. So I'm going to show you, this is just a portion of this, but here is the contents of the pack. So off to the right, I'm going to start to the right first, it's just because it's laid out. You can see information. There's my account information, my username, my RID. There's going to be an array of the groups that I'm a member of. This is how that member server is going to make the decision, yes, you should have access, or no, you should not. Hey, this group is allowed. Hey, Tim is allowed, etc. To additionally protect this pack, it is signed with 2 signatures. Now, when that member server receives this, it's going to check the signature using its own password hash as the key. So there's 2 signatures. The first signature uses the service account's password hash. The second one uses a different hash. And it's a hash that realistically only the KDC, the domain controller, should have. Now, depending on the configuration of the service, it may then ask the domain controller, hey, can you double check this for me? Can you verify this signature is correct? But many times it won't. So for example, that's going to take extra time, right? To send that additional packet to the domain controller and say, hey, can you double check this for me? Can you double check my math and check your signature as well? That takes extra time. That's extra latency. And there's specific settings. So if the service is set to run as part of the operating system, by default, we will not ask for a secondary check from the domain controller. We will just check ourselves. There's a couple other caveats there, but that's the big key. Let's take a look inside that service ticket now. This is the ticket. This is what I'm going to send to that member server. Now, of course, this ticket is, of course, much larger than this, but here are the big pieces. Now, remember, there's 2 halves, right? I send my ticket granting ticket to the KDC. It is then going to give me a ticket in 2 pieces. One I keep, the other I send to that member server. In the piece that I keep, we're going to go to the bottom first, it has the validity time. It also has a session key. That's going to be encrypted using a session key inside of the TGT. So I should be the only one that can decrypt my portion. Now, the piece that I send to the server has information about me. We talked about the pack already. It includes the session key, and you'll notice the session key in my portion as well as the server's portion is the same. So it will not only authenticate, but it says, hey, here's your initial key for secure communication. Pretty ingenious, frankly. This ticket, now if you remember, we only have a single secret, which means this half, the half that I send to that member service is encrypted with a service account NTLM hash. And that's going to be key to one of the attacks that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Now, if you remember, I sent that ticket granting ticket to the domain controller and said, hey, I need to talk to this specific service. Now, when I make that request, I'm saying there's a SQL server over here. I want to talk to this SQL server. Now, I don't know the underlying account. I don't know the account that is behind that particular service. So what has to happen is the domain controller has a mapping between the service account and then that service. So I say, I want to talk to the SQL server on the SQL server service. The domain controller has that mapping so that it can look up and say, oh, this is the hash that I need to use. I need to use this hash to encrypt that ticket. That mapping is called what we use the SPN, or the service principal name, or you'll hear people refer to that as the SPIN for short. And by the way, I see a typo right there in the middle. It says service ticket. It's not French, it's just a typo for ticket. Okay, so what does that look like? So it looks something like this, right? So I've got my client here on the left. I want to talk to the mail server on Cliff. It's really terrible, terrible joke, but Cliff here, right? I don't know the underlying service account. So I say, hey, here's my ticket granting ticket. I want to talk to the mail service on Cliff. The SPN is the mapping between that and the underlying account. In this case, the underlying account would be an account created by some sort of admin called mail service. Similarly, if I want to talk to a web server, Charlotte, get that one, another terrible joke, right? I'm going to connect to HTTP. The KDC is going to have that mapping. The underlying account is web service. It will then encrypt that ticket using the web service account. Same thing with SQL. Right, you guys tracking so far? I don't see any questions, so I feel like we're moving along all right. Now, we talked about this a little bit, but there are a few long-term keys. And this is going to be, well, key, I guess, in a terrible pun, to some of the attacks here. First, we have the KDC's long-term secret. So when we talked about the server saying, you know what, let's get a second look at this. I've got the service ticket. I want a second pair of eyes on it. Let's verify this. What we're going to do is we say, hey, KDC, can you verify this? That secret key that's used to sign that is this KRB TGT password hash. That's used to sign, and additionally, it's going to be used to sign our TGT as well, and our ticket granting ticket as well. And we'll come back to that in one of our attacks in just a little bit. We're going to have my client long-term secret. That's going to be as part of our session key inside of our TGT. And then we've got our target services long-term key, which is part of the password hash as well. There's going to be an encryption key inside there as well. This thing just loves to skip ahead. So we had pretty pictures. Here are these sad pictures. So here's what this looks like at a much deeper level here. So we've got off to the top left, we have Eric, Sec560 Eric with a password of what we have right there. What's going to do is we're going to take that password, convert it into the NTLM hash, and then use that as a key to sign the timestamp as part of our initial request. You can see the AS REQ and the AS rep. That's going to give me then the TGT. The server knows the timestamp. It also has my password hash, so it can then verify that particular signature. Inside that TGT, we saw earlier is the pack. Now here's just a smaller version of that pack, but that contains all sorts of information about me. My username, my working hours, my group memberships, etc. And again, going to be signed using that KRB TGT account. So that's how the first step works. I get a timestamp. I use my password hash as a key to hash that. The server verifies and says, yes, you are now good to go. And inside that now is that session key that I'm going to use. So the TGT and that pack now, right? We talked about the pack a bunch. Now inside the TGT is my pack. Now, when I send the TGT back to the KDC, it is not going to recalculate my pack. What it will do is say, hey, I see you have a pack here. Let's verify the signature of that. If the signature verifies, then we're good to go. Okay, there's a little bit more detail there, but for the sake of time here, that's pretty much the extent of it. Now, that service ticket. This is the piece that I'm going to get from the KDC that I'm going to use to authenticate to the server. We call this that there's a TGS rep. Sorry, TGS rep is the response. TGS rec is the request, and it stands for ticket granting service. Not a really fancy name, but as we saw, it contains my portion contains the validity time for the ticket, the session key. And then the half that I send to that service contains the pack information about me, the same session key so that we can encrypt communication between the two of us, and it allows us to do the proper authentication and then proper encryption as well. Okay. So as we mentioned, the pack. That pack is going to be signed in the service ticket. It's going to be signed using the target's long-term key, that services password hash, as well as the KRB TGT. And again, that KRB TGT, that additional set of eyes, isn't always going to be checked on that particular ticket. Okay, there's specific cases. Short version is web servers will always ask the KDC, hey, can you check this thing out? SQL servers are likely not. Now let's talk through some of the different attacks. I don't see any questions yet, which is fantastic. Don't forget, if you've got questions, throw them into the chat. If I see them pop up and they're still relevant, I will answer them on the fly. Otherwise, I'm going to save those to the end. So we've got our golden ticket. So the golden ticket, if you've watched, was it Willy Wonka? In fact, the counter hack folks in SANS love that movie so much. They created I think the new Net Wars is framed after that golden ticket and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Anyway, so we've got the golden ticket. The golden ticket is essentially a custom TGT. It's a ticket that is created by the attacker. Inside of that is going to be a pack. Well, if I'm creating a custom TGT, what do you think I might do with that TGT, right? I'm going to change maybe my group memberships. I could change my user account. I can change anything I want to. So what we can do then is we can use this to escalate, right? We can use this to escalate. We can use this for pivoting, all sorts of goodness. So here is a sort of our normal flow-ish. Now what we'll notice here is we've kind of, so here's our flow here for me requesting a ticket for the service, right? I send the TGT to the KDC. Now the KDC gets that ticket granting ticket. And now remember, inside that TGT is my pack. The pack is already signed. So what the KDC does is it checks it, says, let's check this thing out. Has this been changed? It checks that by checking the signature. And it will look at the signature and say, oh, look, cool. Everything is A-okay here. So what it does then is it essentially copies and pastes that pack. Of course, in this case, it's my custom pack, repackages it, puts it inside the service ticket, and sends it to the file server in this case. Now the file server says, oh, cool. Now, Tim, when did you become a domain admin, right? We have modified this TGT so that after the verification checks out properly, it's then inserted inside of our ticket, sent to the file server. So what makes this sort of golden ticket so special? The key here is, we skipped that first step. We skipped the first step of asking the KDC, hey, bro, can you give me a ticket granting ticket? Because no thanks, I already got one, right? So I can create this myself. I can modify this thing and create it any way I want to. I can add custom accounts. I can do all sorts of other crazy things, right? So some question here. At the slide 14, there's two signatures inside the pack for TGT. One of them is the target's long-term signature. As far as I can do service yet. You know what? I think that's actually just going to be a typo. So thank you. Good call, Anatoly. There is no targets key in there yet in a golden ticket. You're right. All right, so I'm going to create the ticket. So here's what it looks like. I can use Mimikatz to create my ticket. So what I need to do is I need to give it a the SID, the security identifier for the account that I want to use. I'm going to give it the file location. I'm going to give it the domain. I'm going to give it the user account. And I need to give it the key, right? The key is going to be the password hash for KRB TGT. Now the key here, the key for this being useful is I have to have the KRB TGT. So with the KRB TGT, I have to already compromise the domain controller, right? So this attack, I can only do it after I have compromised the entire domain, right? So as an attacker, this is a tremendous persistence mechanism, right? Now, I got a question here from Brian King. Is that BB King? I hope it's BB. BB is one of my favorite people, wicked smart guy. But his comment was, is this a little bit dangerous? It absolutely is to use in the real world. And I use that, right, because, we're pen testers. We're getting total control of the domain. We have more access than oftentimes the administrators themselves. Can this be dangerous? Absolutely. You have to be extremely careful if you're on a pen test or a red team and you get the KRB TGT account, because if you lose that, your client, your target, is going to have a bad time. Also, it's exceptionally difficult to rotate that password. I can't just go in and say, let's rotate this sucker. I have to rotate it. I have to wait for it to propagate inside the domain. We're not going to go into too much depth on that here, but it can take, 24, 48 hours sometimes for that to propagate. So we need to be very careful. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying there's not value in this, but we need to be very careful. And when we're done, we have to be very careful in making sure we scrub this. Data, a sort of joke, but not really a joke. Data is a liability. I don't want to have this longer than I need to. If I have this password hash, that means that I could possibly lose it. If I have it destroyed after I'm done with my test, then I'm going to be much, much safer. Okay. So I created my ticket here, and now I'm going to load my ticket into memory, and now I've got my golden ticket, and now I can authenticate anywhere I want to, right? With my custom ticket, assuming I'm going to have access, but if I put the right group memberships or the right account names, now I do indeed have access. By the way, thank you for the question, BB. That was a fantastic question. All right, so we also have the skeleton key. Now this is another one of those sort of mechanisms that you have to be very careful with. So it's sort of similar in a way-ish to the golden ticket. So on the skeleton key, what you're going to do is you're going to run something in memory in a process on the domain controller, so that whenever anyone authenticates to the domain controller using a specific password hash, it says the DC says, oh, fair enough, that's cool. By default, that's going to be Mimikatz. So what I could do is if the skeleton key is running on the DC, I can authenticate and say, yo, I want to be the administrator account, the big dog. And oh yeah, by the way, my password hash here, it's Mimikatz. And the server is going to check and say, your password hash, oh, yep, fair enough, carry on. Right? And this skeleton key gives us access to everything. Again, be extremely careful with this. Extremely careful with this. Because we don't want to, give access to somebody else, right? And then here's the use of this using Mimikatz with the skeleton key, right? All right, let's take a look now. Let's talk about Kerberoasting. Sort of not going to work. My favorite here is the TGS rep. Is Kerberoasting, because I frankly came up with it in 2014. By the way, I got a quick little aside for you. How many of you, sure, a number of you have submitted talks to conferences and you're afraid of getting rejected. A little aside here, this is a very common technique that we use in pen testing and red teaming. I had this concept, this talk rejected from, I can't even tell you, 6, 8, somewhere around like that, different conferences. So if you want to do talks at conferences and you're getting rejected, don't stop. I like to think this is a good idea and is useful. I mean, frankly, the bad guys use it in their malware these days, but I got rejected from DEF twice. I got rejected from DerbyCon once before they finally accepted it. A whole bunch of others in between. Black Hat, I got just a pile of those. So, keep submitting. Everyone wants to hear what cool stuff you've got. Anyway, so let's talk about Kerberoasting. What is Kerberoasting? Now, we talked about this before, and maybe if you weren't super familiar with Kerberoasting, your ears may have perked up when you said, you know what, that's weird. Why is that service ticket? Why is that encrypted using the password hash? Can we do something with this? The cool thing is, yes, we can. What I can do now is I can request a ticket and say, request a ticket for a service from the KDC, request a ticket from the KDC, and say, you know what, I've got this ticket now. Let's try to do some password hash, some password cracking. So I'll guess the service account password, I'll hash it, I'll attempt to decrypt, and then as I saved here, répéter, my French apparently, and repeat, and do this over and over and over again. By the way, at the end, I'll talk through some of the potential mitigations here with these various attacks. So what does this look like? So we've got our attacker here on the bottom left. That's me on the bottom left. What I can do if I'm going to be super, super, super loud, is let everybody know, like, hey, you know what? I want all your tickets. Now, the cool thing is with this is I don't have to even have access to those services. I never have to send a single packet to the SQL server, the web server, anything like that. It can be firewalled off, it could be offline. Frankly, it could be decommissioned as long as that SPN is still there. So that's really cool, right? I never have to send a packet to that SQL server. That SQL server could be totally firewalled off from the entire network, but I can still request a ticket for it. And then I can use that ticket in an offline fashion and crack. Now think about this. This means that, oh, my firewall is going to protect me. Not really. We can reach deep into the guts of your organization to get those password hashes, essentially password material for offline cracking. So really, really cool, if I do say so myself. So how can we do some of that extraction? There's a number of ways. I wrote a tool sort of up front to do it. It was terrible, honestly. Mimikatz supports this. We can use Mimikatz to export a key, export the ticket. We can use what most people frankly use is invoke Mimikatz. This is part of Empire as well as PowerSploit. This will then extract that key for us. And other ways to do this with Impacket as well. I forgot to include that here as well. And then we can crack this. And we can crack this with John, or we can crack this with Hashcat. Now, I wrote a cracker. Don't do that. Don't do that. I was in Python. I knew it was going to be kind of slow. It was the first one. I tried to add the code to John, and apparently I'm not smart enough to do C. And I was going to be high tech with this, and I used like the multi-core within Python to make this thing faster. And then I had a friend of mine, Ethan at Black Hills, and I was like, hey, can you check this out? So he got access to this a couple months before I released it to the public. He's like, cool, I got these tickets, and I'm trying to crack. I'm like, cool. He's like, I'm using your cracker. I'm like, all right. He's like, do you know how many threads, because there's a setting in my cracker on how many threads to use. Do you know how many threads is most efficient? And I'm thinking, I'm like, is it number of cores +1 minus cores plus -1? And he's like, oh, just one. I'm like, one what? He's like, just one. I'm like, oh, great. So frankly, probably all my extra coding to make this thing faster literally made the thing slower. So just try to integrate it into somebody else or find someone, well, smarter than me to write the code for you. Next, we have the silver ticket. So if you remember here, this sort of plays into and plays off of sort of our Kerberoasting. Remember that service ticket is signed using the password hash of the target service. So what I can do, if I have that password hash, now I can create my own ticket. And I actually demoed this in 2014 when I came out with Kerberoasting. I changed my user account, authenticating to a SQL server. I changed my user account to your mom, and it showed up in the logs as your mom, which would have been hilarious in a breach if someone's like, "Which account is compromised?" Sir, it's your mom, right? So a little humor there if you want to go back and check that old school talk out. So we're going to, as we mentioned, we're going to recreate that entire ticket. We'll recreate the pack of our own. We can modify an existing pack. We can create it from scratch. And then, of course, we can sign it using that key for the member server. Now, again, depending on the situation, that ticket might be verified by the KDC. That server may say, hey, by the way, KDC, can you check this out for me? Can you verify this for me? Things like SQL Server will not do that by default. Web servers will always do it. There's a bunch of nuances there. Sean Metcalf, actually, and I don't have a link in here, sadly. He has a fantastic blog on this. Sean is a treasure to our industry, wicked smart man. If he doesn't understand something, he researches it and then writes the most detailed blog post you've ever seen. And he's one of the nicest people you ever met. So check out adsecurity.com.org for some details on that as well. We also have the pass the ticket. Essentially, well, use an existing ticket. Right? You have access to a service. We can dump that ticket and reuse it to access additional systems. So I can use something like Mimikatz, where I can dump this ticket, save it, and then import it to another system, or maybe use it later, and then use that to access an additional system. Similarly, we have overpass the hash. So in an environment where maybe NTLM authentication is disabled, if I have the password hash, what I can do is I can create my own TGT here, my own AS request, and then get a TGT, and then use that to get the tickets. So essentially, I'm reusing that hash to get a valid ticket for the service. Not going to allow for escalation, just allows me to reuse that hash. So a little wrap up here. So let's talk through when can we use each one of these attacks and what are the defenses for each. Right? So GoldenTicket. Now the GoldenTicket, I remember when I first heard this, I was like, weird. I have to use this GoldenTicket after I already have full domain admin. And it didn't click in my mind why this was useful, right? Because you've already got domain admin. The piece where it's cool is persistence, and it also allows for very successful pivoting. And it allows you to sort of pop out of nowhere. It's really awesome from a red team perspective. I find it a little bit less useful from the pen test side of the world, but for red team, this is tremendously useful. Similarly, I didn't put it in here, the skeleton key, right? You already have access, really cool for persistence. You have to be extremely careful. Now, Rob Fuller is here, Mubix. I'm kind of intimidated because Rob's here. Again, one of the nicest people I know. He mentioned in the chat and the questions that he was on a pen test, and the previous pen test company had used the skeleton key and didn't reboot the domain controller, which means that that thing was still running. So they had domain administrator by authenticating with Mimikatz on day one. Now, if you think about that, how often does the average organization run a pen test? Maybe yearly, right? Could be longer, I mean, could be a little bit shorter, but that meant that skeleton key was running in memory on that domain controller for a year. You have to reboot the domain controller afterwards, so be very careful with that and make sure that you do bounce that box. Now, be careful doing that on your own. You don't want to cause any sort of outage. Okay, so that's GoldenTicket, skeleton key. Kerberoasting. The nice thing with Kerberoasting is all I need is access as a single user. I don't need to have any sort of special permissions. Remember, the KDC does not verify, does Tim have permission to the SQL server? That's the SQL server's job. The KDC is going to give me the ticket that I'm going to then present, right? So with Kerberoasting, I'll get the ticket and the server is going to decide. So with Kerberoasting, I'll request one ticket, maybe multiple tickets. I'll perform the offline cracking and use that for maybe some escalation and pivoting. Service ticket, I'm going to use this for persistence most often against that target system. Right? Now, I'm not going to be able to use this to access other systems unless I first pillage my target, but it's going to allow persistence and escalation on that specific system. I saw a very ingenious attack a number of years ago. There was one of the threat actors, I was in a breach report, where what they did is they stole the password hash for the computer account, set the computer account password to never rotate, because it will rotate by default in Active Directory, set it to never rotate, which meant they had persistent access to that computer. Really, frankly, ingenious attack. We have pass the hash and overpass the ticket. Frankly, we just need access as that existing user. We can use that to do some of the pivoting, a little bit of persistence in there as well. So the key for these, the big key for these attacks, monitoring. Right? You're not really going to shut down. I've heard some organizations like, oh, we're just gonna get rid of Kerberos. Don't do that. There's so many other problems. Monitoring. If all of a sudden somebody with Kerberoasting is requesting a large number of tickets, you have a problem. If all of a sudden people are requesting tickets with a weaker, a faster to crack encryption, that's a difference, right? So we need a lot of baselines here. If someone is all of a sudden authenticating to a member server but never requested a ticket granting ticket, that's a problem. If you're getting requests for tickets for services and that TGT was never requested, now you have a problem. So the key for this is going to be monitoring. Everyone loves protections, but this is one of those cases where monitoring is just going to be so absolutely key for us. So with that brings us to the end here. What questions do you folks have? Type them into the chat. Again, I want to thank you. My name is Tim Medin. We're the authors of 560 now, as well as Eric von Bogenhout. We are some of the authors there. So we collaborated. I can't say that word on the slides here. Questions. So what about honey tokens with SPNs? That's another good defense. So Chris Alge, one of the up-and-coming SANS instructors, had a question about what about honey SPNs? So what this means is we create a mapping that no one is ever going to use. So if I, as the attacker, attempt to Kerberoast one of these accounts, now I'm requesting a ticket for this service that no one else is, right? This deviation, absolutely, that's fantastic. You're poisoning it, and it's going to be some of the monitoring aspect in here. Again, not a protection. This is much more of a detection. One of my guys from Red Siege is on here. He's like, Tim, your jokes are terrible. Can I have a raise? No, Mike, you are fired. Does key tab factor into Kerberos auth? So with the key tab, this is what, I don't know, I hesitate to say, but like proper Kerberos uses. So on a Linux system, what you're going to do is you're going to set up a key tab file. This is going to be randomly generated, ideally. Realistically, it means that I'm not going to be able to do Kerberoasting. If I can get that key tab, now I can generate my own tickets, but I can't do something like Kerberoasting because it's going to be randomly generated. One piece that I didn't go into too much depth is with these service tickets, realistically for like the Kerberos attack to be successful, that underlying password has to be crackable, right? So we want good passwords there. Now, if we're using the machine account, frankly, you're not going to guess that. You're just not lucky enough. It's way more random, it's way more entropy. You're not going to be able to guess that. That's similar to the key tab. Will Sysmon log some of these activities? Yes, you can get all these logs. It's just the question is going to be, do you have these logs turned on, and are you correlating? The key here is going to be some of that correlation. Any more questions? I don't see any more questions rolling. It looks like I've got all of them. Don't forget the slides. You want the slides, redsiege.com/Kerb. Hit us both up on Twitter. If you have questions, feel free to email and such. Oh, Rob Fuller, another question. What is a good password when it comes to Kerberoasting? I go back to, realistically, most organizations, you're not typing in service account passwords, right? You're never really typing those things in. Realistically, they're not going to be rotated every 90 days or whatever it is. Now, ideally, you would like to use something like Laps and Lads to have those things automatically rotate. I like to say service accounts, some people say 15 characters. I like to go 20. Again, you're not typing them in. We want them to have, again, the key here is not guessable. What does that mean? That's of course, is a little bit of a religious debate. What I say in my pen test write-ups is 20 characters. Are there event IDs associated with the Kerberos tickets? Yes. Do I know what they are? No. My memory is not that good. I'm sorry. Well, you'll have to look that up. Joff Thayer responded back sort of to Rob's question. He said, similar to what I said, hey, you go to 20 plus characters, you're not typing them, so who cares, right? You're just entering it the one time. Ideally is some sort of automatic rotation system, things like CyberArk, is that the right one? I always get that one backwards with another one, where the passwords actually automatically update and such. So. Another question, why did admin use user accounts to map SPNs instead of computer accounts? It all goes back to sort of the configuration. If you want to do like a cluster with SQL Server, you need to have a shared account. So that's why you're going to create a custom account. If you want to have it not tied to that specific computer, then you're going to have to create a custom account. There's lots of sort of design and architecture discussion there. Any tools to help monitor Kerberos? That's a big, long discussion on some of the SIM products, preferably free. Yeah, we don't have time for that one in this. Sorry about that. Cool. Lots of questions about monitoring. Maybe we'll do a follow-up here on monitoring. How about that? All right, Carol, I'm not sure if I can hear you, but I think we are pretty much wrapped up. I want to thank you guys all for attending. Again, this is sort of an excerpt from SANS 560 network penetration testing course. Feel free to check that out. If you've got questions, please, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or email. I'm not going to lie, I'm not fast with responding, but I will eventually respond.
All right, well, thank you so much, Tim, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.